Hi, this is Carlisle Hashem, and this is the Carlisle Hashem Show. And today we welcome Brian Gomes, who is with the Oyster Recovery Partnership. He is the manager of special programs. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Carla.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and about the Oyster Recovery Partnership.
I've been with ORP for the last 5 years. Before that, I was a park ranger and worked at some outdoor summer camps and spent a lot of time in the outdoors. So I've always been fond of working in the environment through the Appalachian Trail in 2004. That's been a while now. But yeah, I love the Chesapeake Bay. Grew up around the Severn River area, and now working at ORP, I get to do a lot of work with now some education and outreach, and doing that here today.
Okay, so ORP, when did they start?
1993, there was a roundtable that brought together several groups, understanding that there was a massive decline in oysters in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and that something needed to be done about it. So 1994 is when ORP was officially born, so this is our 21st year.
And you were telling me you were funded by a number of different organizations.
Yeah, so ORP sees funding through NOAA at the federal level, Maryland Department of Natural Resources at the state level, and then a handful of other grantors, including the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the Nature Conservancy, Chesapeake Bay Trust, to name a few.
Okay, so your truck outside had the Oyster Recovery Partnership.
It's pretty.
Yeah, it looks good. Do you also have boats to say that too?
There's the big boat that does the restoration work, but the truck outside was actually a donation. That wrap job was done by our friends at Shannon Baum Signs out in Carroll County, so that was keeping us
Out there.
We appreciate it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so on a day-to-day basis, what happens at the organization?
So we have about a staff of 10 that works in the headquartered office over in Annapolis, where we have an executive director and some scientists and program managers, different programs, and then we have a handful of staff that work in step with the Horn Point Lab. So the dynamic over there, we have about 8 field crew with a director of the field crew that does the moving of the shells and prepping of the tanks, and then University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, Horn Point Lab. Those folks under the roof are employed by the state of Maryland and are doing the science and the large-scale spawn portion of the full restoration. So we are joined at the hip, as we like to say, Oyster Recovery Partnership and Horn Point Lab.
Okay, so Horn Point is the University of Maryland, under the University of Maryland umbrella, and they have those big tanks down there. If anybody hasn't been there, there are free tours that you can take. And if you could walk us through what happens to create those larvae and then those spat to go and become oysters.
Sure thing. The process, it's twofold. One is the retention of shell, and there's a large shell pile that ORP manages down there on the property. It's old DuPont property there in town, and the shells are clean, dried, and aged. They sit in the shell pile for about a year. The rain, the sun, the flies, Mother Nature does its thing, and then you have more like this one, a clean, dry shell. That one is better.
They feel lighter too.
Yeah, yeah. So once you have a shell like that, that's ready to then go through the seeding process. So that's the one side. The other side is in the dead of winter, we'll have brought in to the lab disease-resistant broodstock that is kept in conditioning labs until it's ready to participate in the spawning process. So kept in the cold water, and then they're laid out on a spawning table in a few inches of water. You raise the water temperature, play some Barry White music, and the spawn is on, as I like to say. You collect all the egg and sperm from that spawn. They are properly fertilized. They are put in massive tanks in the back of the hatchery, where they will live out their larval state of their life for 2 to 3 weeks.
All right, so you have the seed, and the seed takes how long to become the larvae?
So they're in a larval state for about 2 to 3 weeks, and there's a proper greenhouse at the hatchery, so they're fed all the algae they want, the rainbow of flavors, as I like to say. So the good algae, the junk food algae, and it's through automatic systems. It's no longer an intern going in. So they used to have this, gorge and fast cycle where they would starve, and now they are fed metered doses throughout the day, so they are fat and happy, and they get them ready for that stressful period when they're going to metamorphosize from a larvae to a baby oyster or a spat.
And you were saying that the larvae have, 48 hours, and they have that little foot?
Yeah, so it's important that the crew at the lab are keeping an eye after the first couple weeks on the microscopes and seeing that behavior change, because they go from a kind of free-floating, microscopic Pac-Man-like creature in the water column to dropping down and crawling for that 48-hour window. They have a foot, and they are looking for a permanent home to set up on the backs of their relatives, knowing if there is already a oyster there, that's a good place for them to set up their condo. So at that point, when they see that behavior change, you draw off a few million in a 5-gallon bucket, take it out to where that shell has been cleaned and put into big stainless steel cages, and then into basically above ground swimming pools. And I think we'll have some props here.
Some tapes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oysters reproduce in the wild by releasing both sperm and eggs into the water column, producing larvae. Larvae drift with the bay's currents for several weeks before they settle onto the bottom of the bay and attach or set on hard substrate. A single female oyster can release 100 million eggs in a year, but without suitable substrate, preferably a shell on which to set, oyster larvae die. That's why the Oyster Recovery Partnership launched the Oyster Shell Recycling Alliance to collect used shells from restaurants and caterers from across the state and recycle them for new oyster habitat instead of having them go to a landfill. The shell is transported to the Horn Point Lab Hatchery in Cambridge, Maryland, where they are aged and cleaned to become a home to new baby oysters called spat. This spat-on shell is then replanted into the bay and creates a thriving oyster bed on the bay's floor, from which the new oysters, both from the hatchery and from Mother Nature, can grow.
And at that point, they are put in that tank, and after about 48 hours, they are going to drop down and attach to these shells, and they set at that point. And once they come back and look that they've set, they are going to go onto the boat, the Robert Lee, that lives on the pier, the Choptank River there at the hatchery. You load up the boat full of spat-on shell, and then the baby oysters get their free boat ride down the Choptank River to wherever we're doing a planting in the bay or rivers.
Can more than one spat live on the condo of the oyster?
Yes. On average, we get about 10 baby oysters for every half shell. So that's a good return on investment.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So numbers-wise, you were explaining to me that you would think that the numbers would continually rise.
Yeah, so when you first come into the hatchery, you can see a replica small, like tabletop shell pile for each year that they've had production. And yeah, you would think it would be continuing to go up, but there's a few dips in there. And although science and technology continues to evolve, Mother Nature holds all the trump cards, I guess. So there are a few years where it was either really dry or really wet, and that definitely throws off the balance of the water in the bay and how much spat production there is. But I think 3 years ago we were at about 750 million spat on shell between ORP and Horn Point, and that number 2 years ago broke the billion with a B mark, which was huge. Fanfare, trumpets, the whole thing, and that brought the spotlight down on what we were going to do next. Unfortunately, last summer there was a month of suspect water quality where the spawn would go and then the larvae wouldn't eat and they would die. So although we had that one bad month of production last summer, they still hit about 800 million spat on shell. So I think if the cards line up this year, we could be back over the billion mark.
So this whole process, does it follow the natural process, the seasonal process that takes place in spawning of oysters?
The hatchery extends that season, so they will normally spawn when the water gets warmer in the summer, which is part of the reason that the local harvest is the whole R months through October through March. You technically can now get oysters year-round. There's farmed oysters, and there are oysters from northern or colder waters that are wild caught. But the bay oyster season shuts down in the spring to allow them to spawn in the summer. One is they lose body mass. You have a less plump oyster after a spawn, so that's not as appetizing. And there can also be Vibrio, which is a bacteria found in warmer water that can be in shellfish. But what was the question again?
Just in terms of the natural progression that takes place versus the manufactured, let's say, progression.
Yeah. So their spawn in the wild would be just for a couple months in the summer. We extend that to about 6 months. So starting in late March now, we have the conditioning lab and the large-scale spawn going on in the hatchery. Our first planting is tomorrow of the season,
cool.
So that's exciting. And then, and that runs all the way through the end of September. So where it's 2 or 3 months in the wild, we extend that season to about 6 months at the hatchery.
Are there any aquaculture facilities, farmers that are in around the Horn Point area?
Yeah, there's aquaculture has really taken off in the last few years, and we're big fans of that. It's stimulating the economy. It creates a cleaner watershed, and we have lots of different farms. There's Choptank Suites, which is right down the road from the lab there. There's Hooper's Island and Barren Island are also some local guys that are farming and have a good product. Over on the other shore, we have True Chesapeake Oyster, we have Hollywood Oyster, so there are lots of farms in and around the area, and that's a positive. And where you talk about sustainable seafood, oysters are above and beyond that. They're actually restorative, where sometimes a fish farm, you have to feed the fish muck up the water. Oysters you don't feed, and they are actually pulling the nutrients from the water. So they are creating sustainable. Oysters are restorative. So farmed oysters are great for the watershed.
I forget the exact wording here, but you had talked about in the hierarchy of what's in a water column in terms of the types of fish and the oyster and stuff, that the oyster actually takes less, I think this is right, takes less in terms of less from the water than another fish might. Like a rockfish, for instance, it's more to sustain a rockfish than it would be to sustain an oyster.
Yeah. As I was saying, they're pulling nutrients that are already present in the water, so it's not extra feed that they need from the water column. They're pulling what's naturally moving through the tides.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break in a minute, and we'll be right back and talking more about oysters.